Hi everybody, it's me again. I just wanted to do a new video because I kind of glossed over the process with designing the image in Photoshop and all what that entails, but that, depending on the project, it can be as complicated and as time consuming as or more so than the rest of the process combined, and that includes inking, drawing, scanning, uploading, whatever. Depending on the image, a lot of the work can be done in Photoshop. This was a more moderate-sized project. It took a while to get the coloring just right because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, but it wasn't as exhausting as some of the earlier work, certainly, when I was just kind of figuring things out. I mean, obviously I've used Photoshop before, but just figuring out how to make it work for my purposes here. So I'm going to show you basically what everything entails. Okay, so here's the image as I would have got it after it had been scanned. It's not even right side up, so I just go in there, rotate the canvas, and there we have it's right side up. So when we have this rough sketch image, there's a few things I want to do. You can see there's a black bar at the top up here. I just want to go in, clean that up, get rid of it. Typically what I would do, I didn't do it for this design because I wanted to have the more sketchy feel, the more penciled in look, but typically what I do is I go in and I just do cleanup like that, just a simple thing like that, to just clean up the image. The problem, as you can see, is that from there and before, is that it can sometimes get rid of the detail. Smaller lines may go missing, in essence. So you sometimes have to be careful with what you're doing when you're looking at the cleanup of an image. And typically what I'll do is I'll find that the images won't be dark enough, so I'll just go in here, select a black, and darken it up a bit. That's a bit too much, actually. So you wanna adjust the tolerance a little bit. 50 is kind of moderate. 100 will do pretty much anything. See, if I go in like this, you can see I can just slowly do section by section, and I won't, have this big black mass on each of the drawings. You can see a lot of things transfer differently. That's not what I wanted to do. When I had this object in, you can see a little bit of, maybe not really, but you can see a little bit of white there. Originally, in the original sketch, I left a little bit of white in the eyes, but what I had to do is I had to go in and, I had to go in and kind of put those in with the Photoshop tools, because it kind of got lost with, all the penciling and all the charcoaling. So that's very slow. I don't have to, show you how to do this. It's just as simple as taking the fill tool. What I also did with this image is let's create a new layer. It is quite layered here, and I can show you on the original here. All the colors here are composited using Photoshop. It's a pencil sketch, as you've just seen. So I've created here my handy dandy little navigation tool, a series of layers. And it's true what they say. It's always important to name your layers to stuff that you'll remember. I sometimes have the problem of that I will go in and I will forget, essentially. I'll sometimes accidentally select a layer and then I'll do a design. Like suppose I had a layer that was called the hand here, and I just wanted to color the hand. I might accidentally, while I'm working, actually do some edits to the fire here, and that can get confusing. But like it's as simple as, you don't always need to go back. It's as simple as just getting the layer and renaming it to, instead of hand and fire. This image is a lot more simple than other things. I would have, for the gnome drawing, I had, every hat, every hand, every different pants had its own separate layer. And you know, it could get confusing doing that. This is much simpler and much better in my opinion. If I take some of these off, you can see what's going on here. I kind of just even like this image in and of itself. But yeah, so here's the I did a dumb thing with this one, which was I had this main image, but I left it as my background. So when I went back to try and put in the background and the gradients and all that, you can tell that the gradients don't entirely match up. It's not a big deal, so I didn't really worry about it. I have to produce one of these every day, so I'm not going to stipulate too much if this black isn't quite this black kind of thing. But what I should have done was create this image and not have it be my background, but have the background be separate, because then I can do anything what I want behind these images without it tampering with the drawings that I've actually made. But once I got to that stage and, you know, I had already put layers on top of it and my background was locked, I was just like, okay, whatever. I'll just put in my gradients here and put in my reds here. And that's essentially what I've done. The only real differences to the images is that, not all, but the larger parts have been darkened. There was actually the problem, like as you saw before, of things getting darkened too much and there being too much of a heavy black line. So you want to adjust your tolerances for the fill tools as is applicable. This layer is actually extemporaneous, but I don't need it. But we'll just add one by one and go. So the interesting thing about this layer right here is that what I did was I basically took this image, and if I were to put a new image to this layer, yeah, call it layer 1, sure. I'm not going to name it just for these purposes. But what I went is I selected like a light red, something like that. Or maybe it was more like that. And then I just, at the top here, I turned the opacity way down to 22, sure, why not? And then everything is really open. As you can see, it's a really sketchy. It's not like some of the cartoons where, you know, the face will be have its own solid black line around it. Sometimes I try to do it because it's just more practical when coloring things in. But this is a very sketchy drawing, and I didn't really want to do that and fill in. Like you can see, there's gaps here, but I like that. There's a sketchy feel to it. So what I do is I just click there, and then you can see the whole thing has a nice reddish, hellish tint. And that actually helped later on, because I didn't really have to go back. Maybe I did a little bit, but I didn't really have to worry about highlighting the skin tones, as you'll see later. So just giving that a nice, and having it on a low kind of opacity, having a lot of translucency in it, is if I want to darken it, I can just kind of click it again, and there we have a more kind of hellish, reddish feel. So here we go again to our master. Color the background. Wouldn't do that next time. Typically I don't do that. Okay, so if I select this layer, it has that kind of base coat that you saw, the hellish tinge to it. It's less visible with the backgrounds, of course, because they're all in red, but it had that tinge to the overall devil character here. This layer I've named Chernobog Sky. Sky just means everything here has a red tint to it, and Chernobog is, you know, it's just a fun demon name that I picked for this guy. It's good to have fun naming your layers too, because it can get kind of it can get tiresome at times when you're dealing with a lot of layers and you're just kind of tweaking and not really focusing more on the technical aspect of the picture and less the artistic. So I did a similar thing here than that I did with the other image here. If I show you, so what I did was I picked a nice yellow kind of color, maybe like some kind of a darkish brown or something like that. So I picked a nice yellow, again keeping the opacity really low, and I basically just went over and hand painted my devil here. Just put in the colors. That's not precisely what I used, but I wanted to give him kind of like a tarnished gold kind of look to it. Yeah, so I went over with that. I probably would have set the opacity even lower if I knew I was using something like this. And then what I did was I just, I did that to the whole object. And because I was using a low opacity, whenever I wanted to use more shading, put more yellows in here, I would just go over and kind of darken it as you were. And if I darken it enough, you could see the object kind of disappears there. But then again, this is rough. This is just me demonstrating what I was doing. And then for the horns, the highlighting on the horns and the shadow around it, I used just, a regular green. Got a dark kind of foresty green there. Again, put the opacity down very low. And, just went over that. I would actually raise the opacity just a bit here. Just to give it... Yeah, there you see the kind of greens are coming in. And then, as you get to more detailed, I'm not going to do it here, but as you get more detailed, like there's tiny little spikes here, you probably want to change the brush size and stuff like that. And, with a small enough brush size, you can kind of just paint in lines. Like there are these strokes here. That was a messy one, but whatever. And you can kind of, there's like little squiggly things over here. You can kind of just go in and paint kind of to match your drawing. Not to necessarily go over the lines that you're creating, but just to kind of match that shading that you've done with the pencils. It gives it a nice kind of, like the fact that the highlights complement the pencil sketch, I think gives it a nice kind of feel to it. Chernobog needed something extra here, so I thought, go in, give him a bit of green, because, it's not easy being green. So that's that layer. And yeah, it's very simple. I just went in, whoops, here's my master. Very simple, just went in, painted him up, put my kind of browny goldy yellow in there, painted him up, put in the green lines. Now as for the fire here, that's something I had to experiment a little bit with because I didn't know how it was going to work, but it's its own separate layer as well. Very simple. I went in at first creating broad brush strokes with just an orange, also a low opacity. Was kind of the theme of this drawing, using just kind of overlaying the colors instead of like making them solid. I wanted it to have kind of more of a sketchy, more like painted on effect than, solid block colors like a lot of the more cartoony designs. I guess they're all cartoony, but a different style of cartoony. The less of the more kind of comic book Saturday morning kind of designs. And so I just went in and, very light strokes. Again, going over in the orange with that low opacity will give you certain highlights. And as you can see, it's very, very mild. And then I would just go in with different shades of oranges and different shades of reds and stuff like that. And I would just stipple. I would just stipple like that. Yeah, let me just check something. I don't actually know what layer the mouth is on, so I'll have to figure that out. I just went in and stippled. Very easy. At first I didn't know that I was going to be doing this, so I did broad strokes with the brush, with like a larger brush tool, and I tried doing broad strokes in orange, contrasted with red, tried doing broad strokes, orange, contrasted with blue, but then it wasn't working, so because it's one layer, it was simple enough just to delete all the stuff I didn't want, even keeping some of the base orange colors here, and then just going over that and using the stippling technique. So yeah, sometimes you have to experiment with how you're actually placing the colors. It depends on what effect you're going for. So as you can see, I've selected my heroes layer. I'm going through slowly building. Selected my heroes layer. That's simple enough. Again, low opacity. Go in, basically using a fill tool. Boom, some kind of skin color. Boom, some kind of green. Boom, some kind of... I wanted to give them... They wanted to be a bit brighter. I wasn't really worried about, having them shaded or whatever, because it is kind of like a video game kind of thing. So I just wanted to go in and like give them clear colors, and it still's got that kind of like almost watercolored in effect. For the cape here, you can tell I was stroking it with the brush, whereas, the pants, I probably just went in and went click, 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 all these areas, and then just used the fill tool for stuff like that. The girl's hair was the same thing, because it's flowing like that. I wanted the pencil lines and the color lines to match, so I went in and I just painted it in manually with a low opacity brush. And then her dress was probably very similar because there's all these curves and things. And also sketches like this, because the lines are weaker, as you can tell, the lines are a bit weaker on more sketchy image. There's more kind of gaps in them, or like more kind of gray areas, literally gray areas, which, you know, color can seep through. And like if I went in to actually paint her, for example, suppose I grabbed a skin color here, or yeah, I don't know, some kind of nice pink for her, and if I went in and I actually tried to color her, oh no, the whole thing is now a different shade. It works better if I have a full opacity, but you know, I go in and I try to color her, and yeah, the whole thing's pink because it just seeps through. It seeps through because it's sketchy. Even when you're doing solid lines that have been inked in, of course none of this sketch is inked in, but even when you're doing solid lines that have been inked in, you know, it's hard to kind of there are still going to be gaps in the black line, and there's still going to be areas where a fill command will seep through. So it really just depends on. It really depends on the kind of drawing. For this one, I wanted it to look more sketchy, so I didn't mind going in and painting. Sometimes you just have to go in and paint. A lot of times what I'll be doing is, on something like the gnome drawing, or on most of the drawings on the site that have a solid black line, I'll go in and I'll have to actually look and search for where the gap is. Because if everything's basically got a solid black line around it, I'll have to go in and see where's that one area where, you know, it just didn't scan so well for that, like, tiny pixel, or where, for some reason, my pen just didn't, suppose there was a head and a neck, and suppose the head just didn't go around and touching the neck, and then, of course, if you try to fill in the neck, the whole page looks pink, or skin tone, or, you know, green, whatever the creature is that has that kind of neck. Yeah, so it can be time consuming, but sometimes, you know, it's got to be done just so that, you know, you don't have colors going where you don't want. So that's the heroes. And then the only other layer I have is the eyes. I wanted to give them their own separate layer because they just add so much. Again, I went back and I darkened this, and there was something wrong with the eyes, and what I figured was the rest of the body, the black lines kind of had the right kind of black. It wasn't exactly black. It's maybe like an off-gray brown kind of thing that I filled it in with. But it was a relatively light color. So what I did was I went into just these areas and I made them the blackest part of his body, like almost like they're a skull. But of course I wanted to give the character some expression, and that was as simple as adding these two yellow points, which, you know, makes it so much more dynamic than, you know, I suppose if you're going for kind of like a dead look, that's fine. But I really wanted him to have just some furious life, and, you know, just putting a bright yellow in here, contrasting the green, contrasting the gold of his skin, contrasting the redness of the background and everything. Choosing your colors is an interesting thing, too, because you go in, you know, what are you going to make the devil here? What are you going to make hell? What color are you going to make hell? That kind of thing. I mean, are you going to go for, you know, their blue flames in the background and the devil is red? Or, I didn't want to be too entirely cliche with that, so I wanted to make him a gold. I was probably influenced by, when I was very little, I got a Spawn action figure. It was the Spawn antagonist Violator when I was very little. This is like grade 5. And in the comic, the kind of, I don't know, Malboga or something, the kind of devil figure in that world, had kind of a golden tinge to it. So I kind of took that idea, but I made it more of a yellowy gold by, you know, putting in the greens and highlighting the yellow eyes, obviously, like highlighting the fact that it's more of a kind of a sickly yellow than a gold. And you come across weird colors when you're just trying to figure out what to, you know, paint things. Like if I was probably when trying to when doing the intro images for the site, I went in and I was trying to do trying to find out different things to paint all those pencil sketches you see in the intro, trying to find different colors for those. And I came across this lovely, sickly, kind of greeny, yellowy, brown color, just by accident, just by clicking on the right place. in the color palette, and thought I really wanted to use it, but I didn't really want to use it there. And I've come across it several times when painting images and never really had an opportunity to use it. But kind of going for that effect here, it was a good opportunity to do that. This is a darker image, and this is kind of a more sickly fiend, so that worked. It wouldn't work so well as, say, in the Kitty Pong cartoon. I guess the only other thing I would really highlight is the fact that the devils here, as you can see, they're very blocky. There's lots of whites and stuff in. Again, I went in and I darkened them a bit. But that said, I wanted to let them still have their kind of sketchy feel. I thought about going in and making the whites of their eyes really white and stuff like that, but there was this nice pale overlay, so I just let the whites be this kind of hellish pink. And yeah, I just wanted to keep them that sketchy feel. I didn't want them to be like one block of solid color for this particular drawing. In most of the drawings I do on the site, it would be, because it's more cartoony, and, you know, your concretes have to be more concrete. But this is more of a sketchy feel, and I just wanted to keep the idea that, yeah, this was drawn in pencil first. It's not like a mass-produced image or anything like that. Somebody's actually gone in and, you know, sketched it out in pencil and gone over in charcoal, and it has that nice messy thrill that comes with drawing. Yeah, and also, like, the basic overall contrast in this image is, of course, where the simplicities lie and where the intricacies lie. Like, the devil here is the most complicated figure in the piece. Everything else is pretty much simple lines. And interestingly enough, I get away from it looking cartoony by actually kind of adding less than you would expect. By actually adding less features. For example, if you compare this knight here to the character in the Damsels in Distress cartoon, the knight, for example, in the Damsel in Distress cartoon is a more cartoony figure, but he's much, much more detailed than this. But I found that by adding less detail to a character like this instead of more, it would actually look less cartoony and more like kind of a sketch. And he's farther away, he's a smaller image, so the idea is that the details just get, you know, blurred by the fact that he's got a face full of fire over here, you know, the kind of massiveness of this creature and the just like the overpowering, like, hellish light that's all around everywhere would kind of be blurring out the details. And it's the same with the girl down below, you know. She's very just like this figure, you can see she's very, very simple. It's a very, very simple sketch. At the same time, she works better in this than she would in the Damsels in Distress cartoon. And it's because you know, I left in that kind of sketchy feel, that penciled in feel, but I didn't put in you know, intricate details. Like, you look at the Damsels Not So in Distress cartoon, and there's like there's like an image on her dress, and, you know, like, these lines are well formed, and you know, just she has an expression on her face where this expression is nothing. It's blurred. It's almost like she's just an automaton being overshowered by everything. So yeah, it's important to know where your simple images are going to be and where your more detailed images are going to be. And also with things like color, you can do more detailed things. Like the fire looks, as you can see, it's a series of dots, as all coloring essentially is, but it's you know, stepping back, it looks more detailed because of the color pattern that's applied than any actual drawing of fire. Like, you can see bits of like flame outlines and stuff here if you look closely, right there. And he's just got a random pink tongue, because I figured there's so much red in the drawing. Just give him the pink tongue. Maybe it's a throwback to cartooniness. Maybe it's just me being lazy. I don't know. You decide. But yeah, it's you can kind of control where you're being intricate. Again, probably the biggest problem is when you go in and you manipulate things digitally, is that you can sometimes accidentally delete things that you would want, or, you know, it's as simple as, you know, a line doesn't show up, but it happens to be an expressive line on somebody's face. It doesn't show up when you scan it, and it happens to be an expressive line on somebody's face. Or when I go into my master image and I click with the magic wand tool, and I want to get rid of all the, because paper technically, especially if you've been penciling, it tends to have kind of it's messy looking. There's like blotches and smears, and it has more of a gray than a white, which isn't necessarily what you want for a background. So when you do clean up, you want to get rid of all that. But sometimes smaller lines when you're doing a general area will disappear as well. And that can be a problem. Or sometimes you can, your mouse will move and you'll accidentally erase something, or you won't notice. Or, but so you want to keep to the rule that, in general, your drawings aren't, I was told a long time ago. Well, it seems like a long time ago. It was only like 2 years ago. But I was told in university that a key thing to remember is that artists aren't holy, and art isn't holy, and artists aren't gods, which is very true. But what I've taken that to mean essentially is be respectful of your drawing. Be respectful of the fact that you have that you've put so much effort into creating the image before it gets to the computer. So when you're doing things to color it and give it, when you're doing things in the coloring phase, and when you're doing things in the scanning phase and the compositing phase and all that stuff, you don't want to accidentally lose some of the details that are precious to you. At the same time, there are some details that can be just remember there are some details that can be lost to make way for things looking better. Another just interesting thing with layers is different things that happen when you see them without, because you're doing everything in stages, right? You're doing the background, and then you're layering on a filter, and then you're layering on different colors to different pieces all around. So you're doing things in steps. It's very literally putting one thing on top of the other, 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 and just things mask each other and things blend together. But sometimes when you get rid of one, you see some interesting effects. For example, if I got rid of the layer here, Chernobog Sky, it's got this kind of Frank Miller comic book effect, which I was actually considering, after I had done all the coloring for Chernobog, I was considering actually getting rid of that layer that you've just seen, and actually submitting this as the final image, because I really like it. It's got, I don't know, just the contrast between the black and the whites, and the fact that I wanted to make it sketchy anyway was it was something I kind of almost wanted to keep this. To me, it's almost creepier than see him in the flesh. But I ended up going with this because I like the images on my sites to have a lot of color. But maybe one time, maybe at some point, realistically, I'll actually print out this image or keep this image as its own thing. It's still in the Photoshop document, and just have Chernobog in kind of his black and white kind of graphic novel glory over here. I love the fact that it's like a sketch ripping out at like what could essentially be two like painted figures, from some medieval drawing or something like that. And that's another thing too about contrast. You got to make sure the contrast you're using in terms of your drawing style complements itself. If you look at medieval drawings, or like the tapestries from ancient China and things like that, you will see some demon characters that are pretty simple and pretty cartoony, I will say, which is why I kept these kind of flying demon figures over here. You'll usually see that the devil is more detailed than his minions, which is what I liked about this, but I purposely went in here and made these, really simple little sketchy drawings. You can see all the shapes that this guy is made up of. This guy, not so much. kind of, but you know, he's got more of a detailed physicality to him, of course. But also, you want to get the idea across as efficiently as possible, and I kind of like the idea of these, like, you know, kind of Google-eyed, kind of grotesque, just kind of simplistic images being in there. Like, it almost gave it a stylized flavor. Like, it kind of works that they almost don't belong. They're almost a different drawing style. Like these two guys fighting each other. You can kind of see a plane on which they would exist. But I think the plane on which these guys exist is, you know, calling back to medieval fantasy paintings and stuff like that. Just where you will have images from long, long ago in drawing styles that have a certain detail, a certain aesthetic to them that do look out of place. And they look out of place because they're representing, you know, biblical horrors or something like that. And again, like ancient Chinese tapestries, you know, you see them at the museum, you know, from different periods. You'll see, I remember seeing this one at the Royal Ontario Museum where, you know, all the figures looked really interesting, but then there was this, and they looked very realistic, but then there was this demon kind of gargoyle in the corner with this pig snout and these bulging eyes like this, and he looked out of place. But I think that's really interesting. That there's kind of like an artistic history behind that. So yeah, that what goes into compositing a single, putting together a single plane image. I've done a lot of compositing. I think I'll make a compositing video at some point. Probably be a lot shorter than this, and you know, just show you how things are put together. But yeah, that's all for now. I just wanted to give a little tour of Photoshop with this recent image, and I hope you're liking the site, and I hope you're liking these videos, and I hope you keep watching. So stay tuned.